And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're eating into our time, but seriously, we're absolutely thrilled you're here, and we're particularly thrilled that Liz Cheney is now Professor Cheney, Professor of Practice. And I do have to brag a little bit. You've got so many offers. I'm not going to mention any of those schools that think they're better. She chose the University of Virginia because we are the best. That's what's why. In any event, we're going to, I think, have a good time. We're going to learn a lot. It's a serious subject. I need to tell you that Liz has had a cold, and her throat has been sore, in part because we put her through 12 classes and other events between yesterday and today. Although, she wanted to be tested in the classroom. The students loved her. They're going to continue to love her because, of course, she'll be back with us at various times and various places, and mainly to teach students, because that's what it's about. She wants to spend time with students. She wants to learn with them. And she'll also listen to you older people. It's not a problem. But the students, I think, are particularly impressive to her. We're delighted that she's had that experience. So I'm going to give a brief introduction for her just off the cuff, because she's already heard 10 of them, and they're basically the same. So I don't want to bore her any more than I already have. But you know how special she is. I would say most of you knew who she was, because you wouldn't be here probably unless you had followed politics and still follow politics closely. She was in the House of Representatives from 2017 until earlier this year. She achieved a leadership position in the Republican conference. She was number 3 in the Republican conference. And then January 6th happened. And January 6th is not a date to be ignored ever. I hope it is always reviewed in classrooms from early grades all the way up through college, because it's important that people know what happened and why it happened and how to prevent it from ever happening again. And that is what Liz Cheney and her colleagues have done. They, under difficult conditions where most of the Republicans wouldn't serve, you and Adam Kinzinger were the only Republicans on there, and thank goodness you were on there. But it was a very difficult assignment, but carried out with incredible ability and expertise and care. And I'm a little biased here, but I think Liz Cheney was the absolute star of the January 6th committee. And that's why we got her. We only go for stars here in Charlottesville at UVA. But there's a lot more, obviously, to Liz Cheney than that. Now, she sacrificed a lot, really, to this point anyway. She sacrificed her political career. Who knows? She may be back. I've even been humming "Hail to the Chief." I don't know if it had any effect on you or not, but you never know what the future holds. But she sacrificed a lot, obviously. She sacrificed her career and her position, and losing is never a happy moment, although losing for the right cause can be. And I have quite literally carried this around with me. I was so impressed with what you said at the January 6th meeting committee meeting on June 22nd, 2022. And she said, and remember, she's a conservative Republican. She's reminded me of that several times. She has not converted to liberalism. And we're happy with that, by the way. That's an important, we want to have liberals, moderates, conservatives on the faculty, in the student body. We want people to learn from one another. You can't have just one song. You need to have a whole choir in order for people to learn, and that's what we've done. And she is quite conservative on a wide variety of issues. But I'll tell you, whether you call it liberal, moderate, or conservative, she yields to no one in support of the Constitution and our republic. That's important. Eventually we'll get to you, but she's got a sore throat. I
I'm
promised
enjoying this.
I'd eat up as much time as possible so she can keep her voice. I have no problem with that, by the way. I'm quite good at it. She said, I should let you read this in your own voice, but I won't because of the sore throat. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. Those are tough words. So, in any event, we could go on and on. I do want to mention her book, which is coming out in November, and you'll want to pre-order a copy. Little Brown is an excellent publisher, and the book is entitled Oath and Honor. Two words that mean a lot to those of us here at the University of Virginia, particularly honor, but also oath. And the subtitle is very revealing too. A memoir and a warning. A warning. And I think we'll all want to take a look at it. And you can pre-order it on Amazon if that's your preference. I like to go to independent bookstores. We need to support our independent bookstores, and this is a good time to do it. And we'll show Little Brown how much grassroots support there is for this book. But it's going to be very interesting, I can tell you, just from the bits that I've heard during the last 2 days. One other background bit, and then we'll get on to the meat of this. Last year, she received an award that I think is particularly important and appropriate for what Liz has done, and that was the John F. Kennedy Library's Profiles in Courage Award. She received it with President Zelensky, and I think that pairing was very, very appropriate, and it really is a great honor. It's difficult to get that, and they're very particular about who they give it to. So they did the right thing because you did the right thing.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to, this will shock you, we're going to start out with January 6th. There's a lot more to her career than that, but it's important to all of us because we do have to make sure it doesn't happen again. You told a fascinating story today. Maybe some of the students are here, but I think they'd enjoy hearing it again, as I would. What you were doing and how you handled the actual day of January 6th. I learned things I hadn't heard before, such as your father's call. So we'd like to hear this, and then I have a series of questions about what you learned and what we still need to learn about January 6th. So if you can start with the day.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Larry, and thank you to all of you. It's really an honor to be here, an honor to be a professor of practice at the University of Virginia. I kept meaning all day today to mention something which I forgot to mention until now, which is that when I applied to the University of Virginia as an undergrad, I was rejected. So I am very proud to be back.
Did they admit women?
Yes, they did. I'm not that old, Larry.
No, that's
Thanks.
Well, I am. Well, that's terrible, and I'm going to look up the
Yeah,
open
don't.
admissions director.
I'm sure I deserved it.
But we got you. That's the important thing.
Right.
We got you.
But it's wonderful to be here and to have the chance to spend time with you and with students and talking about the Constitution. You know, what we saw on January 6th and in the lead up to January 6th was something we've never seen before in our country. We've faced a lot of threats. We've faced difficult and challenging times, but a situation more than a moment where President of the United States was attempting to overturn an election had never happened before. And earlier today we were talking about the day of the 6th itself. I had gone over to the floor. The joint session begins at 1 o'clock and is normally really a ceremonial event because the Constitution says essentially that Congress will be present while the votes are counted. And there is no role for Congress to decide who the president is except in limited circumstances. If an election is a contingent election and is thrown into the House, certainly that's not what we were facing. But on that day, as I was preparing my remarks, I was in the Republican cloakroom, and I got a call from my dad, and he was calling me to ask me if I knew, if I had seen that President Trump, in his speech on the ellipse, had just said we need to get rid of the Liz Cheneys of the world. And I hadn't been watching it, but my dad and I had a conversation. Obviously, there were security concerns. There were security concerns before that day. And so the question was, should I go ahead and give my remarks that I was planning to give, explaining why it was unconstitutional to object to electoral votes? And we both decided that there was simply no choice, that you couldn't be in a situation where threats or the potential of violence unleashed by the President of the United States silenced the debate. And so I was on the floor as we were preparing to give remarks as the debate started. And before I could give the remarks, before it was my turn, the debate was suspended. And they took the speaker off of the floor of the House, a couple of other members of leadership. And what I remember as the Capitol police officers were coming onto the floor and giving us instructions, and they were certainly instructions that you never would anticipate you'd be getting. They told us to remove the gas masks from under our chairs and put them on. I think most members were unaware that there were gas masks under the chairs. They told us that the backs of the chairs were bulletproof, and they said, and we could hear the mob, and we'd been getting reports that tear gas had been released in the rotunda. So we knew they were coming, and they said to us essentially, you're going to need to take cover behind your seats. And it was stunning to me that this was happening in the United States, and really made me very angry that this could have happened. And it was also clear immediately that my view was that President Trump needed to be impeached and removed from office. I think living through that violence, having seen the violence unfold, understanding what he'd been saying, not just on the ellipse, but in the days leading up to it, summoning that mob to Washington, I viewed him as a clear and present danger at that moment, and believed that we needed to impeach him and that he should be convicted and removed. It was a day that you don't think you're ever going to have to live through, and it was a day that really showed how fragile our system is. And I would just say, sometimes people, you'll hear them say, well, it wasn't that bad. Our institutions held. And my response to that is always, they don't hold themselves. They held that day. They held because of Capitol police officers, Metropolitan police officers, men and women who fought bloody hand-to-hand medieval level combat to make sure that we didn't have the Capitol overrun from both sides, to make sure that things weren't even worse than they were. And ultimately they held because of people in critical positions at the Justice Department, at the White House, in state law offices, state legislatures, and secretaries of state, individuals who refused to do what Donald Trump was asking them to do, was pressuring them to do, because of Vice President Pence, because he wouldn't yield to President Trump's instructions that he should do something that he knew was illegal and unconstitutional. So I think it's a really important lesson of the 6th that it was individuals who made sure that our institutions held that day.
So, Liz, what you're really telling us is this was not a tour of the Capitol.
Right.
Just wanted to make sure, since one member of Congress tried to sell it as a tour.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Georgia case. I actually want to get back to the aftermath of January 6th, but we're all following that with interest because it was a serious, shocking phone call from Donald Trump to senior officials in Georgia, asking them to find those additional votes. Come on, guys, I only need, whatever it was, 11,000 XDX. And it was worse than that. What we didn't know at the time was he and his people had been organizing a fake group of electors. And just today we heard, and this is really good news, they're turning on one another. That always works with the mafia, so, it might help here. But things are happening in Georgia. They're happening with Jack Smith, the special counsel. Do you have an insight into which of these investigations and which charges might end up yielding additional indictments?
I don't have any particular knowledge about those cases beyond, obviously, I follow them, what I read in the news. I think that if you're thinking about what's the most important thing we can do to prevent another January 6th, there are several things. One is don't ever elect Donald Trump again. Another one is make sure that we hold people accountable. And I think that, obviously I believe that President Trump should have been convicted by the Senate. I think that was a real misjudgment to delay that trial. And I think that it was a real mistake that the Senate didn't vote to convict him. But I think it's important that he be held accountable for what he did. And one of the things that we put on in one of our hearings, for example, was the fact that President Trump himself was directly involved in the fake electors scheme and participated in at least one of the phone calls between John Eastman and Ronna McDaniel and certain of the electors talking about the fake electors scheme. And when you think about that fake electors scheme, you had individuals in states submitting to the National Archives documents in which, in some cases, the individuals signed them and they purported to be actual electors certified by the governor of those states, which certainly they aren't. And so I think that there are a whole range of things that we've seen President Trump and others direct involvement in, and I certainly hope and believe that there will be accountability. I think it's very important.
Speaking of accountability, going back to January 6th, you told us a fascinating story earlier about the now Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and your encounters with him because you were in the leadership on that day, in which he was at first very supportive of the idea of impeaching and convicting Trump on that day. What happened?
Well, I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that he sorry.
That's right. I'm wrong
He did not say that he was supportive of impeachment. It has been public that he said that he believed Trump should resign and that he thought that he would ask him to resign. He certainly, if you look at his remarks on the House floor on January 13th, it's very clear. He says, Donald Trump bears responsibility for the attack and that he should have acted once the attack was underway and that he failed to do so. The discussions around impeachment at the time, there were a variety of views, but one that was espoused by a number of people was, look, impeachment will just simply fan the flames of divisiveness, and we shouldn't vote to impeach because it will just divide the country more. This is a time when we need unity. Of course, what happened was, people avoided doing what we were responsible for doing, what our constitutional duty was, and kind of kept looking to the future to say, well, he'll be held accountable in some other way. And there's a reason why the framers contemplated and enshrined the notion of impeachment and conviction for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that's what we should have done. Um, I think, though, what you really did see happen, if you look at the days around the 6th, was there was a unity, frankly, a bipartisan sense in many ways, I would say among almost all members, that what had happened was disgusting and disgraceful and couldn't happen again. Donald Trump needed to get to the January 20th, and then the country needed to move on. And if you look at what people were saying in that immediate aftermath, and you compare that to what they were saying very shortly afterwards, I think you really see the evolution, the hypocrisy, and the lies that began quickly about whitewashing what had happened on that day.
It's interesting, of course, because if they had impeached and convicted, they could have added the provision, as is often the case with impeachments, that the individual may never serve again in any public office, or
Yes.
I'm not sure the exact phrase, but and that was what was lost too.
Right,
We wouldn't be in
exactly.
this situation looking at 2024 if that had been done. Along the way, and the January 6th committee report is fascinating, and it's well worth your time to read it. Every bit of it. You're going to learn a lot that you maybe didn't catch at the hearings or wasn't covered at the hearings, and so it's well worth it. But one thing that I didn't think the committee was able to cover was where the money came from. Who funded this? How was it funded? We had Bob Woodward here recently. Follow the money. Follow the money. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there are several interesting questions about the financing, and some of it has to do with the financing for the 6th itself, but I think an even more, or at least as interesting a question, is how the Trump campaign was raising money after the election, when it was clear the election was over. It was clear that they knew, and we know from the committee's work, that President Trump was being told by the Justice Department and by the leadership of his campaign and his White House counsel, by essentially everyone, look, this election was not stolen. You've lost. Your fraud claims they're not true. And even though he was told that, they still used those claims to raise money from people. And they used those claims to raise money sometimes into entities that as we demonstrated, didn't exist. So this area of the financing is something that we spent some time on, and I know from the news reports it sounds like the special counsel is spending some time on as well.
Because it might be construed as fraud.
Yeah.
Possible. There's more to accusing him of fraud than there is his accusing the election of voter fraud.
Right.
And it's worth noting, and again, this is not simply an attack on one party. It's an attack on an idea that is utterly false, that has taken deep hold, has real consequences in terms of public cynicism, and a substantial majority of Republicans to this day believes that Biden is an illegitimate president, that there was so much voter fraud, it wasn't a real election, that it was stolen from Trump. At lunch, we were talking about our memories of so many presidents or losing presidential candidates who'd been in tight races. Yeah. And yet they did the right thing. Nixon in the middle of the night, and without even having all the results, conceded in the most gracious way possible. He really did. And Gore did it eventually, and both parties have done it. And that tradition's gone. It's just gone.
Well, it's very interesting. If you look back, we were talking about, if you look back at concession speeches that presidential candidates have given, and almost without exception, they say, look, this was a hard-fought race. It didn't turn out the way that we all had hoped, but it's over, and we're all Americans. And usually they give their full support to the person who's just been elected president. And they pledge that they'll work together for the good of the country. And one of the best concession speeches in that regard was Al Gore's, and I'm sure one of the most difficult to give.
Absolutely.
But I think what we saw, and certainly maybe we didn't need a lesson at this, but it became very clear that the character of the people we elect matters. And our system depends upon ensuring that we have people in office, people with power and authority, who will put the good of the country first. And I don't think there's any stretch of the meaning of that sentence in which you could fit Donald Trump. At every moment, he chose to put himself first, and even to the extent of violating his oath of office.
You remember what, and I know you remember what President Ford said as he took office. The Constitution works. We can celebrate the fact that the Constitution works, or it worked in the case of the Nixon administration, and Richard Nixon in particular. We'd have to add some asterisks now, and that's disturbing. It's very disturbing. Now look, let's go back to the point when you were asked to join the January 6th committee, and a whole group of Republicans was asked to join, I suppose, and most of them were pulled by Kevin McCarthy, but you and Adam Kinzinger stayed. How did that happen exactly? How did it unfold?
Well, one of the things on which there was really, I would say, near unanimity in the aftermath of the 6th was that we had to have a commission to investigate what happened. And if you go back through history and you look at every major crisis in this country, essentially, whether it was Pearl Harbor or the assassination of President Kennedy, there's an investigation. 9/11, there's a commission that investigates what happened. And so on the days just after the 6th, everybody was saying, we've got to have a commission to look at this. And Leader McCarthy then sent John Katko, who's the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, he was, to negotiate the terms of this commission with the Democrats. And the first proposal that Speaker Pelosi made for a commission wasn't as bipartisan as it should have been. And so McCarthy told Katko, these are the things that we need to be sure we've secured from the Democrats. We need equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. We need equal subpoena power. And the Democrats agreed to everything. They said, okay, you've got it. We pushed them on the makeup of the staff, and they agreed to everything. And when they did that, McCarthy pulled the rug out from under Katko and pulled his support from the commission. So then we found ourselves in a situation where all of a sudden you had the leader of the Republicans saying, no, I'm not going to vote for this commission. 35 Republicans did anyway. It passed the House. But then in the Senate, the Republicans killed it. And I, of many of the things that happened that are very hard to understand, that's one of them. How you could suddenly have the Republican leaders in Washington saying, we're not going to support this bipartisan commission that we've just negotiated for, but that's what happened. So when it failed in the Senate, the only remaining option was a select committee. And Speaker Pelosi called me and actually asked me if I would join the select committee. And I didn't hesitate. I really believed it was very important that we investigate. Leader McCarthy had the opportunity to nominate 5 of the members. He did, and Speaker Pelosi rejected 2 of them. She rejected Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, and I agreed with her decision to do that. Jim Jordan, to this day, has refused, he would not honor the subpoena the committee issued. He was clearly directly involved in the planning for that day, and has said publicly that he spoke to Donald Trump on that day. So he was directly involved, and it wasn't appropriate for him to be on the committee. And Jim Banks, as soon as he was named, immediately began to denigrate the committee and attack it in very partisan ways. So I think the Speaker did the right thing, but when she did that, then Kevin McCarthy pulled the other 3. So the reason that there weren't Republicans nominated by McCarthy on the committee was what McCarthy decided to do when he pulled his nominees.
Did he try to get you and Kinzinger off the committee? Did he ask you to step down?
Not directly. I mean, there was a lot of sort of suggestion that people are going to be stripped of their committee assignments or kicked out of conference. I mean, at that point, This was in July, and I was removed as conference chair in May. So there wasn't a lot of coordination going on at that point.
Right. And one assumes, although maybe I'm wrong, that Donald Trump had something to do with Kevin McCarthy's change of heart. Just a guess. Just a guess.
It's an educated guess.
Yeah, educated guess. Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. I hate to ask this, but I have to. And I want people to understand what someone goes through when they make a controversial decision that they believe is right from their heart. They believe is right for the country, right for their institution. And they suffer on account of it. Can you give a sense to people of how certain elements in the public reacted, the MAGA groups, the messages you received, that kind of thing?
Well, look, I think that it's no surprise that people were very angry, and there are certainly, I think many of us were targeted and received threats. I do think it's really important for people to pause on that point for a moment, because to be a member of Congress and have to have security because of something that the president or the former president was doing or saying, again, is fundamentally un-American. I mean, there are threats, and I've certainly lived through 9/11 and a whole range of threats, but to have those threats emanating because of actions of somebody who occupied the office of the presidency ought to give everybody pause, ought to really make people think about how close we came then. And also, I think making a commitment that political violence of any kind just can't be part of our public life and our public discord. And committing ourselves that we'll stand against that, because what we saw happen on the 6th is something that leads us down a path of becoming a country that doesn't have a peaceful transfer of power, and we just can never become that country. So it certainly has been an issue. I don't think of the situation, though, over the course of these months as that I would describe it as personally difficult. I just don't think about it that way. Hasn't been pleasant, but it's been both a duty, but also I would say the thing that makes me sad is watching how many of my colleagues did not do the right thing, and I think that's sad for the country.
I asked you this at another session, but I want this crowd to hear it as well. What proportion of the Republican House Conference, your colleagues, actually believed that there had been voter fraud or any of the other charges that Donald Trump made? They were all supporting him, almost all supporting him, and I think you said 147 of the Republican members voted essentially to overturn the election, indirectly or directly. What's your sense of that? What was the proportion?
I think it's a relatively small number, and I always, in terms of the people who believed that there had been fraud sufficient to change the results of the election, people who believed the claim that the election was stolen from him, I mean, I think 20% is probably high, but around that, inside of our conference, I'm talking about. But there were far more people, obviously, who would say things like, "Look, we're not trying to overturn the election. We just want to give voice to the concern people have," and they would say, this is just giving voice to concern, but it wasn't just giving voice to concern. It was fundamentally, taking an action that Congress doesn't have the authority to take, and those people who enabled President Trump, I think, bear really significant responsibility. And in some ways, if you look at the people who believed and still believe the lie, there are a lot of Americans, millions of them, who are good and honorable and honest people who've been totally betrayed by Donald Trump. And by the way, going back to the financing point, completely betrayed by him, and then he tells them, "Give me your money and I'll fix it." Just unbelievable, unbelievable fraud. But then there are also even more, certainly in the House, who know it's not true, but who enable it. And I think they tell themselves, well, it won't matter. We'll just do this one more thing. It won't really matter. It's just for show. And it really does matter. And obviously we saw how much it mattered.
And it's helped to resurrect Donald Trump for 2024,
Correct.
along with other things. I don't know why this subject is on my mind. I just don't know why. But Fox News. We all know about the events of yesterday, but to what extent do you think their bold lying, and that's all it was, bold lying about all of it, which is now proven to any rational person's satisfaction? They've proven that. That's the great thing that Dominion did in that suit. To what extent did they set all of this up and make it even more difficult for the public to support a new president, or to come back together, or to put Donald Trump in the past?
I think they are, absolutely responsible. And as you say, the $787.5 million settlement, when you think about how high the bar is for defamation in the circumstance like this against a media company, it should be high. The First Amendment really matters. But obviously, Dominion's evidence was so strong that Fox was willing to pay $787 million rather than have to go through that trial. And some of it has become public. We've seen the reports about what the Fox hosts and the leadership were saying to each other in their emails about their knowledge that the claims were false, and then what they were saying on television. And we saw that in the committee hearings as well. And I think that the extent to which Fox was putting on information that was, that they knew to be false, and you can see in the emails discussion about ratings, and we can't drive away our viewers, and I think that it did real damage. I actually worked at Fox. This tells you how much things have changed. Back in 2010 and 2011, I was a Fox News contributor. I was on Fox News Sunday regularly, and I substitute hosted for Sean Hannity on a number of occasions.
Irony.
Yeah. But what I've watched happen there, and how dangerous it is. And look, you see it with hosts like Tucker Carlson, who, on a pretty regular basis is spouting Vladimir Putin's talking points. And that ought to give people real pause as well, saying things that are absolutely untrue and that are lies.
I'm going to give you one quick anecdote that you may find interesting on Tucker Carlson. He's had at least a couple of kids through UVA. And I remember, and I live over on the lawn, we have alumni up on the balcony, during graduation. And I was assigned him in May of 2017. And I was happy enough to talk to him about politics. What else? I don't know, the weather or sports. But we started talking about Donald Trump. Now, remember when his hidden emails were revealed, he said, "Oh, that was just a passing thing. I don't really hate Donald Trump. I don't mean that. It was just a passing comment." Well, in May 2017, in talking to me on the balcony, he said precisely the same thing in much stronger language, and indicated that Donald Trump called him almost nightly, and that Tucker Carlson was so sick of it, he now had his wife answer the phone and say Tucker was gone. So it's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, who
Yeah.
wouldn't want to talk to the President of the United States? Well, we finally had a president that people didn't want to talk to. But what was there was true, and these are just
Yeah.
excuses of one sort or another. Um, the decision made yesterday, many people were criticizing it because there was no apology on air or off air, and the Fox statement was just breathtakingly stunning, talking about, well, now we can return to our program the highest journalistic standards. Oh my God. Do you think they should have required, the Dominion should have fought to require the Fox hosts and maybe Rupert Murdoch himself to apologize for the damage they did to American democracy and its damage we're still experiencing?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say, first of all, paying $787 million is hard to explain away. And so I think, yeah, look, I think every one of those hosts who we know was saying something completely different at the time and who's gone on air and said things that aren't true ought to be apologizing to the American people. But I also think there's more to come. There are other outlets that Dominion is involved in litigation against. There's a Smartmatic suit still going on against Fox, but they've done real damage. There's just simply no question about because they've peddled the lie knowingly.
Well, lying hurts, and we know that, those of us here who support an honor system. I want to change the subject slightly before we go, well, actually more than slightly, before we go to your questions. And I want you to be thinking about what you want to ask. And I'm going to request two things of you that I'm going to mention now, and I'll remind you as we go to questions. We've got microphones here and there. The first is to please identify yourself. Your real name, where you're from, or if you're a student, I'm first year, I'm second year, I'm a graduate student, whatever. Give Professor Cheney a sense of who you are. And second, and I'm going to enforce this, I love enforcing things like that, you are not to give speeches. And if you start giving a speech, I'm going to politely ask you to sit down. We want to cover as much as possible, and you have to have a question. And we don't want to have to find the question in a word salad, with people expressing their views at great length. There's another time and place for that. So those are the two things I'm going to ask you. Be thinking of what you want to ask. Where are microphones so that they know? Okay, well, I'll ask you to raise your hands when we're ready. But what I want to ask, and so many of the students have asked this, because it's their future. They're the ones who are going to have to live with what is produced from the calamity of January 6th. What kinds of additional guardrails can we establish statutorily? We all know constitutional amendments are virtually impossible, but statutory guidelines, or just trying to restart traditions that matter. What can we do? What can individual citizens do? What can the country as a whole do?
Yeah, well, I think number one, I would say electing good people. And I think this is a moment where we really have to step above partisanship and look for serious people on both sides of the aisle that you can support. It's a challenge because a lot of times when you go in to vote, you find you don't have any great options. And that's why we need more people running for office. We need options. We need more people who are willing to get in and be candidates. I would say to be engaged, and I know it can be easy to think, look, I'm living my life. I don't want to deal with politics. It's a mess. It's a headache. But I think we have to recognize that if the good people don't get involved, then you end up with people who aren't serious or who are destructive who are elected, and I think that's dangerous. I think one of the things that we did as a committee was propose and pass through the House legislative reforms, for example, the Electoral Count Act. We had a situation where the senators who were working on the same thing actually got angry at Zoe Lofgren and I for legislating. We had to remind him the House gets to legislate as well as the Senate. We both do that. Zoe and I actually had a good time. We sent a letter to the senators who were sponsoring their version of the Electoral Count Act reform, which we thought had some problems. And in the letter, one of the things we said was, have you read Federalist 68? So anybody who tells you that the Federalist Papers and the framers are, not relevant anymore, they're very relevant. And their determination that, electors should not be swayed by the politics of Washington really comes through. They were very, they forecast very much the challenges that we would face. I think that, we also talked about looking at things like enhanced criminal penalties for dereliction of duty. And I think that there are a number of areas where, we could come to agreement in a bipartisan way on things like protections for poll watchers. But we can do all of those things. And if we elect people who are going to blow through all the guardrails, then we're still at risk. And I always think about the inscription that's over the fireplace in the state dining room in the White House. And it's from a prayer that John Adams wrote to Abigail. He said, may none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof. And I always say, and I'm sure he meant women too. But it really matters. You've got to elect people who take seriously the defense of the Constitution.
And maybe even consider voting for someone of better character with whom you disagree on some issues. It won't kill you to do that. Let me ask you finally, before we go to audience questions, about the Republican Party, because your whole life you've been involved in it. Obviously, your whole family is a bedrock, really, of the Republican Party. And yet, you have said if things don't change dramatically, you don't believe you're any longer a Republican. And it does seem to be moving in that direction. What can change the momentum? What can change the inertia of moving forward for the Republicans of becoming, frankly, as you mentioned it, a cult? Yeah. It's a kind of cult of personality. And even beyond Donald Trump, you look at what I call the crazy caucus in the House of Representatives, and there are more members than ever. And I'm not saying there are no Democrats in there either, but predominantly they are Republicans, the Marjorie Taylor Greene caucus. And you've had some wonderful tweets. If you're not following her on Twitter, you really should. She comes up with the best tweets directed at Marjorie Taylor Greene. She reads them. I just love to see what her reaction is when she does. What do we do? Because we need we have a two-party democracy. Some of you are probably independents. You want to have additional choices. Okay, let's get real. We got two major parties. That's the way our system works.
I'm not signing up for trash and independence.
Oh, okay. I know that you may depend on them one of these days. Absolutely. Shame on me. We love independence. We love all of you. But seriously, what do we do?
Yeah. Look, we have to have a party, I believe, that is dedicated to substantively standing for conservative principles. And, right now, the Republican Party, I think, for a whole range of reasons, and it's mostly because of elected leaders. Elected leaders who don't understand leadership, who made a decision to take an unconstitutional step with the argument, well, my voters are very pro-Trump, so I have to do this. And to me, that's the opposite of leadership. Leadership is saying, look, you've elected me, I took an oath, and that oath can't yield to partisanship. It can't yield to party politics. And there were so many times when I would hear elected Republicans say, look, if you just ignore him, he'll go away. And I think we all have to agree now that he can't just be ignored, he has to be defeated. He has to be defeated. And that had such a toxic effect, because if elected Republicans were saying, just be silent about the attack on the Capitol, be silent about the role that he played in it, just be quiet, that turned for some into, Kevin McCarthy, a full embrace of Donald Trump, a full embrace of him. And you would have people then around the country, Republicans who might be on the fence about it, saying, well, look, how could it be so bad if so many Republicans are silent? And there are just an awful lot of Republican leaders, elected officials, who are acting like bystanders, and that's sort of the best you can say. And then there are others who are enablers. But we have to demand more from our politics. I grew up in a political family, and I would always, I can remember very often growing up hearing people criticize politicians and say, oh, politicians aren't honest, or all the things you hear about politicians. And I would always argue about that and say, no, they're people of character who are involved for the right reasons. And I believe that. There really are on both sides. But unfortunately, right now, some of the loudest voices aren't people of character. They're not involved for the right reasons. I don't think they've read the Constitution. They certainly aren't committed to their oath of office. And when you think about the challenges our country is facing, and then you think about the people that we are entrusting with coming up with solutions and resolutions, there's a big gap. The challenges are up here, and the caliber of a lot of the people we've elected is, really low. My arms aren't long enough. So I think we got to take it seriously. If you demand excellence from people you hire, if you demand excellence in other parts of your life, you've got to demand excellence from our political leaders, given the crisis and the challenges we're facing. I don't know what's going to happen with the Republican Party. I think that if Donald Trump gets the nomination, it will cease to exist in its current form. I think it'll splinter, and it should, if that happens.
Republicans replace the Whigs. Maybe it's time for some other party to replace the Republicans. We'll have to see what happens. But we'll all be watching together, and we'll see what's on the mind of this wonderful audience. It's been very patient as we talked about a lot of subjects. So where are my... you can raise your hands. I can't call on you because I can't see half of you. I'm sorry to admit that, but it's absolutely true. So they're going to hand out the microphones. Okay, here we go. Oh, John Michael, there you go. He's an excellent student. Excellent student.
Hi, Congresswoman. Nice to see you again. Welcome to UVA again.
You've been at every one of my events, which is really impressive.
Yes, I have. My question is, there were some reports that you were being considered to be an impeachment manager, and I was wondering if you could speak on that. How serious were those conversations? Thank you.
There were, in terms of this second impeachment trial, there weren't any conversations before the trial about it. I actually think that it would have been wise to appoint some Republicans as impeachment managers in the trial. But beforehand, there was just speculation. I wasn't approached about it. I don't know if other Republicans were, but I doubt it. But look, I think the people who did manage the impeachment trial did a really good job, and were able to put on a case that secured a more bipartisan vote for conviction than any we've had before. Unfortunately, there were a number of senators who were able to say to themselves and to say publicly, he should be convicted, but he's out of office, so we can't convict him. And that goes back to why I think it was such a mistake to delay the trial.
Good. Let's go. Who's next? Whoever's got the mic, you're in charge. There you go.
My name's Joe Talley. I'm a second-year history student here at the university. I had a question about foreign policy, specifically Israel. Israel had an election recently, as I'm sure you know, and during that, one of the ministers added was Bezalel Smotrich, who's the Minister of Finance. Smotrich is someone who said that facilities between Israelis and Palestinians should be segregated. Palestinian children that throw rocks at the IDF should be shot. That pride parades are worse than bestiality, and that Reform Judaism is a fake religion. Do you think the United States should give unconditional support to a country which willingly includes people who hold such a basic contempt for the values of equality of races and religion that we in the United States consider important in our international allies? Thank you.
Thank you. I have not seen what he has said specifically. I think Israel is a hugely important ally for the United States. And I actually spent a number of years at the beginning of my career working on Middle East issues at the State Department. I think that it's very important for us to recognize the real security threats and challenges that Israel faces. And the extent to which the United States and Israel are allies doesn't mean that the United States is signaling support for every statement of every minister or for every policy of the government of Israel. But I think that they are one of our most important allies. And you know, one of the challenges that we faced when I was at the State Department was in order to ensure long-lasting peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, there's got to be a partner on the Palestinian side who will ensure and guarantee that you won't have suicide bombings, that you won't have support for terrorism. And it's been very difficult to find that kind of a partner on the Palestinian side. I think one of the most concerning things that has happened inside, frankly, both parties, and I see this on college campuses a lot too, is the rise of anti-Semitism. You can have debates and discussion about Israeli policy, debates and discussion about the policy of any country around the world. But anti-Semitism is something that can have no place in our discourse. And I think it's really important for people to educate themselves about what's happening on both sides, about the extent to which Israel's security is necessary in order for there to be peace, and to do everything we can to work for peace, but to recognize the significant threats that Israel faces and that we face from countries like Iran, for example. And so I am a very strong supporter of Israel and of the U.S. relationship with Israel. I think it's fundamentally important for our security, and it's important morally as well.
All right, good. And we can cover other subjects. No problem. Who's next? There you go. Go right ahead.
We could go to him next. Go ahead.
Oh,
she's got the
there are two
mic,
of
I
them?
think. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I will just be quick. Hi, Professor Cheney. My name's Ellie Murphy. I'm a Master of Public Policy candidate here at UVA. I also had the opportunity to intern for you summer 2019. Incredible experience, so thank you for joining us. My question to you is, for UVA students moving forward, what are the broad lessons that you hope that students will take from your course that they can apply to their future public service careers? Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I think that one of the most important messages that I have for students is the potential, the opportunity, and the responsibility that you all have. I know Professor Sabato teaches, one of the classes I spoke to today, a class about JFK and his legacy. And I think that President Kennedy is a very interesting example, whether you agreed with him on policies or not. There were so many young people across this country who were inspired by his example to seek office. And I'll tell you one story about this. My dad was a student at the University of Wyoming when President Kennedy spoke there just a few months before he was assassinated. And my dad talks about what it meant to him to hear this president talking about the importance of an educated citizenry in terms of the defense of our democracy, um, and what a important and essential good it was to serve your nation, and how that affected my dad and his decision to go into public service. I was telling this story to Steny Hoyer, who was the Democratic leader, and Steny said to me, I had exactly the same experience. He said, I was a student at the University of Maryland, and President Kennedy came to speak, and I think that making sure that our young people understand the potential that you have to be involved and to make a difference, but also I don't think you have a choice. I don't think any of us have a choice. And as I said, the people who want to unravel our system are very engaged and very active. And it's going to take everybody on all sides of the political spectrum to stand against that.
Who's next? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paul Wright, alumnus. I was wondering, you've seen inside of political campaigns, especially presidentials, and I'm wondering about the financing for 2024. There's a lot of mega donors that say they're not going to give to Trump. And if that happens, can he simply win with free media on Fox when they eventually reconcile and put him back on? Or is he going to be starved for cash?
Well, he continues to have a very aggressive fundraising operation online that is more of the grift that we've seen. One of the things that has been, I think, not given enough focus and attention to is the fact that the Republican National Committee was actually paying his legal bills, and all the way up until he announced or began to say he was going to, I guess he has, until he announced he was running. That demonstrates the hold that he had over the party that he continues to have. So I think he's going to face a number of challenges. I think it's important for us to hold the big donors accountable. You've seen some sort of take public stands that they then change very quickly. So I think it's going to take more to defeat him than just hoping that the cash dries up.
Who's next? Yes.
Hello, my name is Kyle Matus. I'm an alumni of the University of Virginia, a former student of Mr. Sabato, who's still learning from you, of course.
I won't increase your grade, Kyle. It's over with.
And I'll be chief sessions chief of staff when you joined the Rules Committee.
The Rules Committee, yeah.
My question for you is this. Learning a lesson from both Dan Newhouse and Jamie Merritt Butler, both Republicans from the state of Washington, both of whom voted to impeach. What they both told me, what I'd like to hear from you, is they were able to do that in part because they had a jumbled primary. Are there structural changes that we can make in our electoral systems to change some of the incentives so that you don't have colleagues of yours or formerly of yours that are behaving in the ways that they have voted? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think one of the things that I've thought about since the 6th and actually since the impeachment vote is sort of rethinking the idea of term limits. And I think term limits are problematic. I'm not sure that they're constitutional, frankly, so may require an amendment. But I've been opposed to term limits for Congress in the past for a number of reasons, including that if you limit the terms of the elected officials, then you end up in a situation where, as tremendous as the staff is on the Hill, and they're incredible, the people who aren't elected end up having more authority and ability to influence things than the people who are elected. And I don't think that balance should be out of whack. But it has occurred to me that if members were term limited, then perhaps you would have had fewer members make a decision to vote for their own political safety, and you would have had a situation where more people did the right thing. But again, I mean, it's a sad state of affairs if you're thinking that you've got to impose term limits in order to do that. I think that as you think about the kinds of things we could do that would make a difference, I think you're right about Jamie and about Dan. But look, we have different primary systems around the country. Some of our districts, obviously, more and more of our districts are designed in a way that you don't end up with those members who are moderate, who are sort of swing districts. But at the end of the day, I think the single most important thing is the people that we elect, and not incentivizing the kind of dangerous craziness that unfortunately we're seeing far too often now.
Who's
I think
next?
this gentleman has wanted to.
Well, let's see.
Oh, okay.
You have to get the
I
mic,
was looking
sir.
out for you.
Just tackle them. Grab the mic. You need the mic. All right. There we go.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm a fourth-year computer science and global studies major. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. So, earlier this year, we saw a very similar attack on the capital of Brazil, and we've seen other indicators of democratic backsliding worldwide. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how the events of January 6th and our nation's failure to reckon with them and the aftermath affected our ability to lead on a global stage, and what indicators are you looking out for when it comes to the health of democracy worldwide? Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think if you look back at the Reagan administration and the, I don't know if that's me or you guys, and the extent to which there was an understanding then about the importance of free nations of the world uniting, and of democracies uniting. And we had important institutions that developed out of that, like the National Endowment for Democracy. And I have had the opportunity to speak with people like Natan Sharansky, who was in the Soviet Gulag when Reagan was in office. And he talks about how much it meant when they got word in the Gulag that the President of the United States was standing up for them and for freedom and for prisoners of conscience. And so it really matters what America stands for. It really matters that we don't slip into beliefs about moral equivalence, and that we understand and recognize the responsibility that America has to lead around the world. And that debate too often, I think, turns into a debate where isolationists in both parties, unfortunately, are making claims that aren't true and that are not safe in terms of our security. I think that January 6th, I certainly heard from people that I'd worked with around the world on that day about their fear. To see something like that happening in the United States, I think did cause real fear. I think it also, caused real concern for people, not at the same level, certainly, but when you had President Trump suggesting that America was going to pull out of NATO, or that NATO was obsolete. I think that America has to lead. It doesn't mean that we are standing alone. It doesn't mean that we are imposing our views, but it means that we're supporting people like Zelensky and like the Ukrainians as they stand against the Russians. When you have individuals, in the House Republican conference, some in the Senate, some on television, suggesting that, we all ought to be agnostic in the choice between Putin and Zelensky, or between the Russians and Ukrainians, that's a recipe for the defeat of freedom. And it matters, the Chinese government watches. And if the United States abandons Ukraine, it makes it much more likely that the Chinese Communist Party will decide that they can take Taiwan. We need to spend more time focused on deterrence. We need to spend more time focused on strategic deterrence, and why a strong America is the best guarantee that we actually won't have to fight, that we won't have to go to war. But President Zelensky said many things, but one of the things he said that I think is so important is that the free nations of the world have to be better armed than the autocracies, than the tyrannies. And we all believe in soft power. It's very important. Diplomacy, I worked at the State Department, I believe in diplomacy. but it's not enough by itself. And if we fail to have the kind of defenses we need as a country, or we fail to defend people who are fighting for freedom around the world, soft power alone won't defend democracy.
I'm Bill Howard from Nellis Ford, Virginia, retired actuary. Here I am.
Oh, very good.
Is it possible for this country to get away from where Donald Trump led us with such a simplistic slogan as "Make America Great Again"? Is our society so complex that that's going to be a continuing danger?
Look, I think that I have real hope when I look at our history and I look at the kinds of things we've come through before. I also have real hope when I think about the vast majority of the American people. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about people who are on the extremes in both parties, but I think that most Americans fundamentally believe in decency and in freedom. They want their kids to be safe. They want the country to be safe. They want the economy to grow so they have jobs. They want opportunity for their kids. You know, the vast majority of Americans are honorable and decent and good people who want that in their government. And I think that what we've seen is it won't happen on its own, but I do have real faith that what Donald Trump has done will be rejected, and what he's perpetrated on the country in terms of the attempts to unravel our fundamental systems will also be rejected. But I think it's not self-sustaining. We all have to be involved in order to make sure that happens.
Right back there.
Hi, Professor Cheney. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a third-year politics and history student. I think after January 6th, and even with more recent events like with the 3 legislators from Tennessee, there's a lot of people, young people in particular, that are afraid about the state of our democracy. What would you say to someone that's afraid? How can we feel confident that our democracy is still alive and is still working?
Well, it is still alive, but I think that we all have an obligation to keep it working. And, I spent a lot of years working in countries around the world that aren't characterized by democracy, and watching the sacrifices that people have been willing to make, and watching how quickly democracy can slip away in other parts of the world. I suppose I knew on some level that democracy is fragile, but I didn't think that we'd be in a situation where it could be so at risk in the United States. And I think that for your generation, everyone in your generation, everyone in every generation, but especially you guys have to be willing to say, look, we aren't going to live in a country where violence determines who rules. We're just not. And I think part of that goes to what Professor Sabato said about there may be cases where you say, look, I disagree with this person on X, Y, and Z, and they're in a different party than I am, but I know that person's going to fight for the Constitution and support them. In the 2022 midterms, for the first time ever, I endorsed people who are Democrats. One's Abigail Spanberger, who is, Abigail is a wonderful member of Congress, and she's the kind of person I am thinking of when I think about people who are serious. I always know, when I was in Congress, I always knew that if I was on the other side of an issue from Abigail, if we were ever going to be debating it, man, I better be prepared, because she was going to be prepared. But she and others, people who are willing to listen. And look, I think this is something we have to work on college campuses too. Being willing to listen to other points of view and other perspectives and learn from them, and be willing to say, be willing to say, you know what, I had one perspective, but now that I've heard your arguments, I have a bigger perspective, or maybe I've changed my mind. You make really good points. And that's something that we have to demand from our elected officials and on campuses. But look, I think working for people that you believe in, voting, you know, the 2022 election, we defeated a number of election deniers because people your age came out to vote. And that really matters. You've got to go vote. And, you know, as a nation, I think that we can survive bad policy. It's not great. You know, I'd rather not have to survive bad policy. We can do it. We can't survive it if people try to tear down the Constitution. And so I think that's got to be what drives all of our engagement and involvement.
Hi, Randy Gordon, College of 80, and thank you so much for your defense of our democracy at personal cost. So my question really is around the Electoral College, and it may be to both of you. So what are the roots of our Electoral College? Is it still relevant? And is it time to consider a change where everybody's vote is equally valued?
Don't look at me.
I believe in the Electoral College. You know, I used to represent Wyoming with 3 electoral votes. When President Bush would remind my dad every once in a while that, you know, he only brought 3 electoral votes to the ticket, my dad would always say, yeah, but you needed them. So, look, and I think that the Electoral College is structured to make sure that, you know, the big states, population-wise, don't manage to completely overwhelm the smaller states, and it's part of a system that that I wouldn't want to change. We had discussions about this actually on the Select Committee. Representative Raskin and I had this discussion, and the question was, you know, should one of the recommendations be that we abolish the Electoral College? And we didn't recommend that. I didn't agree with it, but I think that you know, it's very important for us to recognize the extent to which what happened in 2020 was not legal under the current structure. It's not legal or constitutional for you know, the president to be telling the vice president, you ought to just reject electoral votes. The problem wasn't that the law allowed what Donald Trump wanted Mike Pence to do. It was illegal then. And both the Constitution as well as the Electoral Count Act make very clear that if there's a slate of electors that's certified by the governor of a state, Congress has to count those. And there was, obviously, we talked about an effort to submit alternate electors, but those were fraudulent. So I wouldn't want to see it abolished, and I wouldn't want people to think that what happened, what Donald Trump tried to get Mike Pence to do, and others, John Eastman tried to get him to do as well, and advocated that was legal. It certainly wasn't legal under the law at the time.
Can you tell them the wonderful anecdote that I heard you tell just 2 or 3 people last night at our cocktail party about Jamie Raskin, who's a liberal Democrat from Maryland, conservative Republican from Wyoming, but it's a great anecdote.
About the books?
Yes, about the books.
Jamie loves it when I tell this story. Jamie and I were elected to Congress the same year, and we're on very different ends of the political spectrum. And one of the first times I was ever talking to Jamie was on the floor of the House. And he's a constitutional scholar, a professor at American University School of Law. And so I was asking him about his writings. And he said, well, I've written several books. And I said to him, well, why don't you send me, you know, one of your books? And he was very kind of sheepish, and I couldn't understand quite why. And he said, well, he said, my latest book is all about how George Bush and Dick Cheney stole the election in 2000. And I said, okay, well, I don't really need that one, Jamie. You can send me another one. But Jamie, you know, I think he really reflects the kinds of relationships that we built on that committee. And having the opportunity to work with members that I hadn't worked with before. I'm not sure Benny Thompson and I had ever had a conversation before serving on that committee. And what an important thing it was to have the chance to sit with members of Congress to say, you know what, I don't agree with you on these things, but we have to work together for the Constitution. And the other thing Jamie says a lot is that he really looks forward to the day when we can get back to disagreeing with each other, because you know it'll mean that we've righted the ship, and I think that's very important.
It's such a wonderful story because it makes so many points at once. I'll tell that one myself for many years to come. I think we have time for one or two more. Yes.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Will Hancock. I'm a first year studying economics and English. And tonight you've mentioned, or thank you for coming, and thank you for coming to UVA as well. Tonight you've mentioned founding fathers generally, the Federalist Papers, and quoted John Adams. But as a UVA student, someone seemed missing.
No.
And so,
my God.
It's all right.
So I'm wondering if you have any Thomas Jefferson quotes that are near and dear to your heart, or have influenced your political perspective in any way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gee, thanks so much. Yeah, look, I was really struck, actually. Well, first of all, people have asked me why I decided to come to UVA, and had the opportunity, as Larry mentioned, to go other places, but the opportunity to be at Mr. Jefferson's University, at a place where the founders and the framing of our Constitution is at the heart of what this place is, made the choice very easy for me. And yesterday when I was walking through the rotunda, I was struck by one of the quotes there about, and I won't get it quite right, but it's Jefferson's understanding and recognition of the importance of an educated citizenry. And obviously, his founding of this university was, I think, among the very most important things he felt he did. And so certainly, you know, the very notion of who we are as a people, of what the Declaration of Independence means, is at the heart of what we're all working so hard for. I think a lot about Lincoln and his reverence for Jefferson and his reverence for the framers. But in particular, if you look at Lincoln, and there's a wonderful book I've talked about before called Lincoln on the Verge by Ted Widmer, but you look at what Lincoln said in the speeches he made as he was traveling from Springfield to Washington to be sworn in. And all along the way, he talked about the Declaration of Independence. And the fact that he believed in the words of the Declaration, that he believed they were true, and that they were an ideal for this nation to live up to, made Lincoln dangerous in a really good way. Made him dangerous to people who were cynical about the founders, who were cynical about our founding documents. And I think as often as we can, looking back towards far from perfection, obviously, but the notion that, as Frederick Douglass said, the way that we attain the ideals that our framers set out is through those documents. It's through the Constitution, and educating ourselves about that. So I really appreciate you raising Mr. Jefferson, and I'm mortified that I didn't, but I'll email you some quotes.
That is a wonderful question and answer on which to end. I've promised Professor Cheney that she can leave right on time at 8 because she really has used just about all of her voice. And by the way, we should tell them the reason her voice is held up is because the Alumni Association gave her a very special gift. It was a lozenge bequeathed to the Alumni Association by none other than Dave Matthews.
Worked.
So,
I have to get the brand name
yeah,
because it was
you
good.
have to get
yeah.
the name right.
Yeah.
Look, the one thing I do want to say in all seriousness is that you mentioned your father was influenced by Kennedy's appearance in Wyoming. Steny Hoyer was influenced. That actually happened to me as well in my home city of Norfolk 4 days before the election when Kennedy visited, and I went to see it, and I was hooked on politics from then on. But I want you to know, and I really do believe this based on the comments that I've gotten from students today, you and your actions and your decision to join the University of Virginia, I had to throw that in there, has motivated some of these young people already and will continue to as you come back here. For them to run for office and for them to fulfill their obligations as a citizen. And honestly, that will be one of your greatest legacies. And we are so proud that you're with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.